I don't wanna be. I do. I'm feeling goofy.
Hey everyone. My name's Jason O'Neill. You might have seen me spamming the mailing list at various points. I asked if I could come and talk about web apps in Haxe, and after having seen some of the other presentations so far at this conference, I feel a bit underqualified. Some of you guys are doing amazing work, so it's pretty cool to see it. The reason I wanted to talk about web apps in Haxe is because I feel like as a website developer or web app developer, using Haxe, you sometimes feel a bit on your own, like you're not sure what everyone else is doing, you're not sure what the standard frameworks are, what the best libraries to use, what the best way to do something is, and it's kind of a little more isolated than gaming, and I think that's because Enemy just has such a force behind it that everyone's just kind of rallied to that and to everything else. But there's quite a few people, and as I've gone around, I've talked to people, and other people are doing it, but we're all wondering what each other are doing, so I thought I'd talk about what I'm doing and hear what everyone else is doing. So I work with a group called Sheridan. They do all sorts of stuff, but they're basically a research group, so they do research and they do product development, and I've been asked to make an app for a school management system. And when we were asked to make it, they had a few aims in mind. They wanted a one-stop shop for all the student logins, so a teacher can get in there and they can view attendance records, they can view medical data, they can view like pastoral care notes, they can do all that kind of stuff. They wanted it to be cross-platform because teachers they might bring an iPad to school, they might bring a laptop of their own, they might bring a Mac, they might, they might do anything. A lot of them have different phones and they wanted to be able to check stuff from there if they're out on duty in the yard somewhere, or maybe they're on an excursion and they need to quickly check something or get a student's parent's phone number. So there's all this kind of data that they need, and they wanted something where the teachers could get it anywhere. So that's what they asked us to do, and cross-device, so it wasn't just to be, it needed to work on desktops because that's what they have in all the schools in Australia pretty much. They have desktops in every classroom for the teacher, and it needed to work on tablets because every teacher seems to have an iPad anyway, and some of them have Android and smartphones as well. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever worked with education, but it's a different audience to us. If I was developing an app for you guys, I could do something fancy interface and you guys would enjoy figuring it out. Teachers aren't quite like that. They tend to, I don't know what it is about the personality type that gets attracted to the job, but they're very hesitant for change, scared of technology. They assume that if something doesn't work that they must be horrible, and then they close it and turn it off and unplug it and throw it out the window. And you have to try and make it as easy to use and as familiar as possible. So they're kind of the aims that I started with. And all of this, and the first version had to be out in 2 months because that was when the new term started and that was how the paycheck was coming in. So to get all of this going, I looked at it and I went, all right, Haxe is the language I know best. That's what I can use it in. In terms of cross-platform, if I was writing Objective-C, Java, all that, I'd have to do a web as well because I need it to hit all the different desktops, and then to do that for each mobile platform was just going to be too painful, nowhere near enough time, and I don't have the skill set. And so I ended up choosing to do a web app because it works everywhere. With responsive design you can get it to work on small stuff, and even though the performance isn't as good, I knew, hey, I'm using Haxe, later I can switch to native, but I'll start with this. So that was kind of my rationale for it. Plus, almost all the teachers, even though they're scared of technology, they have Facebook, and so they know how to use websites, they get the idea, they know how to use tabs, they know how to search. It's not a new interface they need to learn, it's something fairly standard. So this is the site we came up with. Now, when a teacher logs in, the first thing they'd see is their timetable for the day. So, you know, their timetable for the week. And so then they can quickly choose whichever class they wanted to look at. And it's Sunday, so it's the start of a new week, and it's only got some data which I filled in just playing around before. But there's all this here. We've got, not that you can see it well on this projector, but we've got all the students down the side, and they can mark their students as present, absent, late. They can do out of class. They can click on a student and get details, all the info about the student. Yeah, so that's the app we made. And part of what we've done is just tried to make it as fast and as simple as possible. So it actually pulls down a whole bunch of data about the school at the beginning, so that stuff loads really quickly. So if I wanted to search for someone called Matthew, excuse me while I type on this foreign keyboard, as you're typing, it's all pretty quick because a whole bunch of that data has been cached, and it's just filtering it on the client side and reducing the load on the server. So that's the kind of app we went for. Feedback was really positive. People found it easy to use. Everyone was stoked when it worked on their no-name phone, or when, you know, it was pretty good. We've had the difficulties we have hadn't been with Haxe per se. It's been with all the difficulties in government reporting for attendance data and all that kind of, yeah, government, don't deal with them. So that's the app we've been working on. I just thought I'd show that so you can get some kind of idea of what I've been doing for the last few months and why I've been developing all this stuff. When I came to start it, you kind of have to evaluate what technologies are available to you. These pictures aren't loading. There should be pictures in there. At the top, oh well, there's kind of several major frameworks, and you guys would know this. Like when you're talking about server-side stuff, you've got Rails, you've got Django, you've got your other MVC type ones like Microsoft has MVC.net, PHP has a whole ton of different things. So, okay.
Are your pictures like on Google Drive?
I don't know.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. So, sorry. PHP. So there's all these frameworks that you can choose from, and imagine that there's some boxes there. And the way they all work is they feed into, or they give out a JSON API usually. And then on the bottom, you've got all these client things, again, not loading, but you've got Ember.js, you've got Backbone, you've got Angular, you've got all these kind of things to choose from. And they always go through these APIs. That's how people choose to do it. Now, I don't really like, I don't like having to switch brains from front-end development to server-side development. I find that pretty annoying, and having to remember 2 sets of APIs, 2 sets of syntax, and it's like, you get used to it, but I used to have to do it with PHP and JavaScript, and when I started using Haxe, I was just like, I'm not going back to juggling those. And I mean, some places they have a back-end team and a front-end team, and they do it like that. But if you're doing both, it's pretty painful. And so, anyway.
Did you not check if this?
I can have a quick look at what's going on.
Valerie had the same problem, and it was because
I don't know what it is.
she had the same problem. It was because the image was
on Google Drive.
So maybe you have to connect to your Google account with this.
I don't think that's what it was. Yeah, I won't worry about it. Anyway, the point of the story is Haxe sits over on the right. It's on the server. It's on the client. You don't have to worry about the in-between JSON APIs because of Nicholas's fantastic remoting. Who here has used remoting? Yes? About half of you. For those of you who haven't, it's a pretty incredible way to do client-server stuff. It lets you, on the client, and I'll show you more later.
Is it not because you're on localhost?
It might be. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not too important. So anyway, the remoting API lets you kind of, from the client, you don't have to worry about serializing stuff to JSON and then making sure you're calling the right endpoint and then doing all those things. It lets you just call a method as you would on the server, but then you attach a callback and it takes care of all the HTTP, it takes care of everything. You get code completion, you get type safety, so it's pretty great. And then, yeah, don't worry about it. Hey, it's okay. I think these are the only ones with raster images, so hopefully the SVGs work later. So anyway, these, I was going to have Haxe like all the way up the side here, and that kind of covers server and client. But if you ever wanted to have the JSON API, you still can, but when you're rushing to get something out the door, you don't have to worry about it, and you can get your type safety, and you can do all that. And later, if you need to expand it because you want a native iOS client or you want to give an API to your users, you can add it. But to get out the door quickly and to make sure your code's safe, yeah, Haxe is pretty good. So I decided to use Haxe, and so then the question is, Node.js, PHP, Nico. Out of the guys who are doing web development, who's using PHP? Few people? Yeah. Node? Yeah. Some of the same people. Nico? Yeah. It's cool. Yeah. So I started PHP, the PHP tag was what drew me to Haxe for the first time years ago. But PHP or Nico, as far as I'm concerned, they're pretty much interchangeable. Their APIs are almost identical, and what works on one has almost always worked on the other. So you've got those two options, or you've got Node.js. Node.js has the asynchronous API, and it's not as compatible with our standard library, though I can't remember who it was. Somebody's been making a synchronous version of our standard library for Node.js. But so I was trying to decide what I was going to use, and in the end, my decisions came down to, I love the SPOD ORM database mapping, and that's not available on Node.js at the moment. So that was basically what made my choice, and then Nico was faster than PHP, and it was easier to test because you got Nico Tools Server, and so so I ended up targeting Nico. But really, as things get harder, or if you were doing an app which required more like WebSockets or like just, I don't know, stuff which Node.js has more access to, external libraries and APIs that have been set up for Node.js, it's pretty useful stuff. And in the future, everything I've done, you could probably port it to Node.js without too much difficulty. So for now, Nico, but I'm kind of open to everything. So we'll see. So I chose to use UFront. Franco and Andreas kind of spent a whole lot of work, and they launched it here 2 years ago. Who's heard of it? Handful of people, yeah. So it's kind of famous in the Haxe like web development area as being really good looking but completely undocumented and hard to figure out, which is exactly what it was while we were using it. So it's based on the MVC.NET framework, which it's Microsoft's kind of answer to web frameworks. And the whole idea behind it is that everything is unit testable. So your session stuff can all be swapped out and mocked, and your routing can be swapped out and mocked, and your everything can be swapped out and mocked. And so everything, every element of it is made to be something that you can test and that you can really pull apart, make sure it's, I don't know, you guys know unit testing, right? I don't have to explain that. So the more you test, the safer you feel, and it's designed to let you do that. It's got inversion of control, all that stuff. So it's quite powerful and it's quite pluggable. That nature was designed to be tested, but that also means that it's quite easy to swap things out. So if you don't like the view engine, use a different one. If you don't like the routing engine, use a different one. If you don't like something else, it's quite easy with it to, just decide, I don't like this particular technology, or I'd prefer to be using something else, and to swap it, which is why with this framework, it'll be quite easy when the time comes to port it to Node.js, because everything can just be swapped out, which is pretty cool. One thing about it is it was done really before macros were a big thing. I don't know if they were actually out at the time when this was written. Do you know? Maybe not. It's 2 years ago. And so there's a lot of runtime type checking and stuff like that, and there's a fair bit of weighty stuff in there which could be heavily optimized by macros, and which I will try to do at some point. And you know, then Haxe is suddenly going a whole lot faster than the original framework it's based on. So, but at the moment it is a little bit heavy, but we'll fix it later. So my experience using it, the source code is the best documentation. That was kind of the difficult way I had to learn things. Oh, I don't understand how the routing's working. Okay, like let's start at the top and read through the source. It was quite painful, but I've made a whole lot of notes, and I've purchased a domain, newfront.net, and I've started writing some guides, and so hopefully over the next few months I'll be putting those up and having some tutorials and some wiki documents to actually help document it, because I think it's an amazing framework, but no one's ever been able to figure out how to use it. So, you know, being a Haxe web app developer sometimes feels lonely. That's what I started with. It's like when I was using it, I'd fire Franco an email and he'd answer me and he'd give a good answer, but it's kind of like or you wouldn't hear discussions about it, you wouldn't find many tutorials or blog posts kind of explaining stuff. So that's something which I really hope to change. I think Haxe has a lot of power and a lot of potential for web apps. So I'd like to see more people using it, more discussion around it, and so I'm going to work towards that. And if anyone else wants to join me, let's do it. And there's always room for more macros. I found myself when I first started, especially with like my models and just doing relationships and joins between tables and stuff, there's just a lot of repetition in my code, so write more macros. Yeah. And then finally, with UFront, the code base was really flexible, and anytime I found something which either wasn't quite working the way I wanted or I thought it was too slow, I could either swap it out, or at least I could see how I could swap it out and do what I want to do. It's a really flexible code base, and while the current implementation is probably quite heavy, it's also, I can see the path to having it really lightweight, and you know, being quite a lightweight web framework as well. So yeah. So there's another image which hasn't loaded. That was a picture of like all the GitHub repositories which I've created for UFront. I've basically made a whole bunch of modules, and I'm going to run through some of them now. Some of them use macros, some of them are just helpers, and that's the sort of stuff I'm helping with using. So the first one was a command line tool, which the Haxe lib for it is called ufront-uf tool, and so what it'll let you do is haxlib run ufront setup, and I'm pushing all these Haxe libs. I was trying hard to get it done for today, but I didn't get there, but probably tomorrow or soon after. Should get them all online. So there's the basic one, gives you a skeleton project, it's ready to run. Then, oh, that's the same, never mind that. Interactive shell. Haxlib run ufront shell. Who's used IHX, the library? I think it was Ian, somebody on the mailing list made it. Anybody? No? It's an interactive shell for Haxe. It's like a REPL type thing, but it doesn't use HScript like most of them. It's actually bizarre in that it actually compiles a new fresh program each time, but it's nice and quick. And anyway, it gives you all the features that you need, and I've integrated it with this, and so you run it and it imports all your models and it imports your APIs, and you can actually go and look up all your users or do a search or use, and it's all uses all the macro powered stuff. Because it's not running HScript, it's running actual compilation. You can do all your SPOD magic and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. So other than that, there's, I've created in the framework a concept of tasks. So say you've got a task which runs each night, and what would it do? Maybe it, what? It runs each night and does your backups. And so I've created something in there so you can create a task for it or a bunch of tasks, and then you can run those either from the command line here or through an admin interface, and so you can kind of browse through and do it with a graphical interface, or you can use a command line and you can launch them from a cron job, that kind of thing, without having to worry about wget or like permissions and all that kind of stuff. So haxlib run ufront, run task space, and then whatever your task is called. So, and I haven't done this yet, but this will be the next stage of the little command line tool. It's just automatic scaffolding for a controller called this or a model called this, and just automatically just throws in kind of empty files that you can work with just to speed things up. The next one I made something called Easy Auth. So ufront comes with some kind of authentication system, and it seemed a bit complex to me, so I decided to, you know, plug in a different one. And it's based on the concept of users and groups and permissions. So each user can belong to many groups. So I might belong to the Haxe group, and I might belong to the web developers group, but I don't belong to the game developers group. And then each group is assigned permissions. So if the web developers group is allowed to log into the web server, and I'm in the web developers group, I'm allowed to log into the web server. So the permissions are based on enums in your code. I should have actually drawn up what it looks like, but you just define an enum, and you might call it app permissions, and then you're like, the permission to delete your own post, to read secret data, to, you know, access admin area. You just define something like that, and then anywhere that you've got, they shouldn't be capitals on user there, but if you've got your user, so your current user, you can go user.can, and it does a quick check. Is this user allowed to do these permissions? And it's all type safe, and it's got auto completion, and so it's like just quick, easy way to do it. And sometimes you need more complex systems, but for a lot of the situations, this is small enough and easy enough. So that's what I started with. Now, ufront uses model view controller, which I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with it. On the web, it's simpler than, you know, complex front-end applications where you've got actors and mediators and everything. On the web, it's just kind of like your controller deals with the request, your view deals with the templates, your model deals with the database. That's about it. I added in an extra step, which was the API. So your model's dealing with the database, and your controllers gets a request saying, oh, you know, can I get the information about user 34 or something. But rather than going through straight to the model, I'm getting it to go through an API. And the reason for that is so that I can use that API on the client or on the server and have separate controllers. So I can have a controller on the server which does it, or a controller on the client which does it, but all the business logic stays in the API, and you can call it from one or the other. Like, it pretty much comes down to a matter of preference whether you want to run something on the server or on the client, and I think that's pretty cool. So there's a bunch of times where I'm like, yeah, this one can stay up there. No, this one will run on the client. So models, I did a whole bunch of build stuff for models. Who here's used the spod macros stuff? No. So Haxe comes with a whole bunch of macros which help map your model stuff to the database, and they help you define indexes and the database types and the constraints and all that kind of stuff. So I've done a few extra things, and so I've got an extension of sys.db.object, which is ufront db object, and you still import the types, and so then in this example we're importing a user as well. So this is an example for a blog post. So class blog post, or class post extends object. And you've got a title, it's a string, it's got allowed 255 characters. You've got a post, which is random text. I think it can hold up to 16 megabytes. Date and time, and whether it's been published or not. So that's all standard stuff. The difference I've got here is that for now, I've got ufront db object has an ID field, and it's just an auto-incrementing integer. I know that doesn't fit every use case, but for me, for now, it does, and it allowed me to do relationship stuff, which I'll show you in a second. So that's kind of all fairly simple. The only other thing I did is I made it so that the uFrontDB object also has an implementation on client platforms. So on Flash or JavaScript, you can start one of these objects and it will work and it will transfer with remoting, and it works. So what it lets you do is have a row in your database which demonstrates a user. You can read it on the server, and then you can send that object to the client, and it's all still there intact, and you don't need to worry about juggling types or anything like that. So here's one of the things I added. I don't know, you guys might not be able to see that, so belongs to. So I implemented 4 kind of relationships. One is belongs to, one is has many, has one, and many to many. So Haxe had built-in support for belongs to with the apt relation metadata before, but I've kind of adopted a different syntax and I've added the other ones. So with this, belongs to basically ends up becoming a whole bunch of different things, but it adds the author ID field, and then it sets up properties for saving it, for checking for null safety, all that kind of stuff. So you only have to write that one line and the rest happens for you. Has many, this happens on the opposite end. So if a user has many blog posts, the blog post belongs to a user. So it's like on one end, anyway. So the ID goes on the belong to side, but on the has many side, it'll search. So what this ends up doing, comments. So the user has many comments, and it becomes a getter for an iterable. That should be HTML escaped, but anyway, sorry. It becomes get comments, and then in there what it does is it does a search. I've messed that example up. It should be comment.search. Sorry, I must have confused that with something else. Anyway, it finds everything. Yeah, I messed it up because I don't have to write it anymore. I just write that one line and it all works. So has one is similar to has many. It's like it doesn't have the ID in itself. It's checking an ID on a foreign field, which means it always maps to the null version of something because it might not exist and there's no real way to check that. And so in this case, we might have a header image for our blog post. It goes through. It's much the same. And the example is once again wrong. Never mind me. Many to many, so you might have a tags model somewhere and you need a table with all your tags, you need a table with all your posts, and then you need a join table in the middle. So that syntax at the top, you start with it's basically many to many A, B, and A is your current model and B is the model that you're relating to. And so what that becomes is, yeah, anyway, many to many is actually, it exists at runtime as well. The other ones just kind of have functions which do everything. This actually exists as something at runtime which figures out, and I've not got it doing automatic joins yet, so it does a query to the join table and then a query to the related table. I'll probably try and join them at some point, but I just haven't yet. So yeah, that's how that works. And then combine it and you have something like this. So the simple stuff at the top, title, post, date, is it published? And then all these relations and all those getters and setters and everything are all inserted for you. I think that's pretty good. So that cut down my lines of code and the simplicity of my models hugely. And yeah, as I was talking about yesterday, it's like the simpler your code looks, the easier it is to find errors and to understand it, to read it, for other people to grasp what you're doing. So that was really good. The models also have validation. So each model has a validate field. And by default, all it checks is that things which shouldn't be null aren't null. But you can also get it to, and when you go to save, if something isn't valid, it won't save. It will return a list of the invalid things instead. So there's some shortcut metadata for this. So @:validate, so you do it before your title. So on var title, you do validate, and then in here you can put pretty much like any boolean, anything that would go in if this. So you might have validate title is not nothing, because that's a bad idea. You could do validate title.length is greater than 2 if that's a rule that you have on your blogging system. There's also a shortcut, which is just underscore is the current variable. So yeah, if this field is different to a blank string. And so that all works, and when you go to validate, if any of these fail, it will return an error.
So the underscore is just like maps to all the...
It maps to whichever field the metadata is attached to. So, yeah.
So the first one is exactly the same as the third one?
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
And you can also do custom functions. So at macro time, if it detects that you have a validate title function, when you have a title field, it will run that, and that just does a true-false check. So it does all that, and it'll either let you save or it'll block you from saving. So yeah. There's also some authorization checking, so you could do, it's basically in a function called check auth-write. So all this stuff does slow you down a little bit, but it's just easy. I've got 10 minutes, all right. So this, yeah, so here what we're doing is it basically returns true if the person is allowed to make the save, false if they're not. If author ID equals user author dot current user dot ID. So if you are the author of this post and you have the permission do new post, then it'll let you do it. That was modeled. I have an admin interface. It's pretty, the style sheet on this live site is broken at the moment, so you'll have to excuse it, but did I type that right? No, I didn't. I don't think I'd ever get used to this. Yeah. So there it is. So hired boss. So then in here you've also got your tasks, which is a whole bunch of different stuff here. This is all about syncing to like their authoritative school database stuff. But I've also got a link to Nicholas's SPod admin. Yeah. Has anyone seen this before? Only 2 people. One of them the guy who wrote it. No, 3. So, well, this, it is a slightly changed version from yours to include the join tables, but basically this lets you sync any change you make to your database to the server. So if you change a model and you change it from having a string of 20 length to 40 length, then it does that change for you. Like you come in here, it reports that that's something that's gone wrong. Or that's something that's different, and you click synchronize and it all synchronizes. It also lets you search things, insert things, which I think it's pretty cool. I think there's like more stuff you could add, especially the relationships I've got in. If I could make it so that you could get a drop down box or something like that, I think that'd be pretty cool. Yeah, unless it's thousands and thousands of things. But anyway, that's pretty, I'm pretty like stoked with that idea, and the idea is I'd add more later. So at the moment it gives you the database admin and it lets you run tasks, but in future I'd like to be able to do user and permission management, add this user to group, give this group these permissions, all that kind of stuff. It would be cool to have stats and analytics, or just general pluggable stuff, so you can write a plugin for the admin interface which, you know, reports crashes or which does other things. I think it would be good. So moving along, because I'm running out of time, we've got remoting APIs. Who's used remoting APIs? Yes, they're awesome. I talked about it before. the way I've set it up is you basically define a class called API, implements remoting API context. You write down which APIs you want as a public var, and the macro thing will set up the context for you. So this is an example of what one of those APIs might look like. Login API implements that class. Public function, attempt login, username, password, and then it does its logic and returns a result. And so then when you go to use it, you can use it on the server, result equals login API attempt login, or on the client, login API proxy, and that proxy is automatically created for you. So a macro goes through and defines that. And I don't know how the actual proxy works, but I couldn't figure it out. Don't ask. Okay. So it creates the API proxy, which has the exact same functions, but the last argument is a callback, which is a great way to be able to run stuff from your client logic. So yeah, this takes care of setting up the remoting context, creating the proxy classes, all that. Client DS. This is cool. A remoting API that lets you fetch and save database objects from the client. So this is an API I set up, which it kind of ties into the whole ORM thing and the whole remoting thing, and it lets you from the client request stuff. And I still haven't finished implementing all the permissions for it. The save permissions are implemented, but the read permissions in terms of what you're allowed to read, I'm still working on that. But it basically lets you on the client say, fetch all the posts, and it will do it there, and it'll give you a promise or a future. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So user 34 promise, and so it works similar to how manager works, except it's called client DS, not manager. And so this is on JavaScript or in Flash or something. Client ds.get 34, and so then that returns a promise, and when the promise is fulfilled, you do your logic. You display something, you do whatever. You can also do this for multiple things, so user 34 and then all of the posts for that author, and then when both have loaded, then go do your logic. So you can do all of this, and the whole thing saves and caches, and yeah, so if you load all the posts once and then go off and do something else and then come back, it's all still there and you don't have to make another request. Like you can ask it to, but otherwise it just saves load on your server and saves more round trips. So you can also save back. So if we get the thing, we wait for it, it loads, we change the name, and then we save it, it does another callback promise, and you do get into callback hell, so this is where something like Tink might come in handy. But yeah, you can, you basically can save or modify stuff from the client, which you've got to be careful with security, and that's why I'm implementing those functions at the model level. But I think it's pretty cool, and with what I've done on this website, it actually loads at the start, and it takes about 0.7 of a second, but it loads every student in the school, every class, every teacher, and all their timetable data. And all of it takes about 0.7 seconds, including the HTTP, the server processing, and the unpacking on the client, and then everything's instant from then on, which I thought was reasonable. So anyway, current state, all libraries should be on HaxeLib and GitHub by tomorrow, hopefully. See how we go. It works on Nico. It compiles to PHP, but I haven't been testing it. And unit test coverage is pretty old. So it was done, there's unit tests from when it launched 2 years ago, but they haven't really been updated, and I need to look into that and make sure that we're all good. So many of the like kind of admin tool features or that like back-end interface you saw, that's all pretty ugly, I guess. So there's work to be done there. But over the next few months, I want to launch ufront.net, tutorials, API, wiki, so that I think it's a great framework. It just lacked documentation. And the more documentation, hopefully the more users, the better support we'll get. So at the moment, all the routing that happens is all using runtime type information, so it's a bit slow, so I want to swap that out for macros. And I want to make it so that it's easy for you to write unit tests for your code, to test an API, to test a model, and easy for you to mock them and have some tools to help with all of that. So future, Node.js support would be nice. If anyone's interested in that, talk to me. Full client-side controller support. I want to emulate the entire MVC on the client, including using push state for the URLs and everything, so that you can pretty much just decide whether, you know, you could have the same controller action run on the client or the server, depending on if their JavaScript's good enough. Stronger debugging support. I found it quite hard, especially with the remoting, to do debugging. So I've put in things in there like it traces, if you trace on the server, it appears in your JavaScript console. And if it crashes out with an error, it gives you a stack trace and that kind of thing. But it's still pretty tough if you hit something. So maybe, Nicholas, I can talk to you about what the best strategy would be. I don't know. The dream. I'd love to see UFront become the client-server framework for Haxe. So everyone's got their client, everyone's got amazing stuff, and I think the guys from Prime, what you showed this morning was really, really cool. And I know Massive has their stuff. Everyone's got client stuff. But in terms of something which sits on the server and which you can call your data back and forth, I'd love to see this get documented and developed and tested enough that it gets some widespread adoption, and that it becomes something which, when people are using Haxe and they go, oh, I need to write a server-side, even if they're not a server-side person normally, they can use this and it's documented enough and they can figure it out and they can make their app work. That's what I'd like to see, and that's where I'd like to head. So that's kind of what I see. That's my experience of web apps with Haxe. It's been tough at times learning it, but I think it's well worthwhile, and I think it's got a huge amount of promise, especially with all the remoting and the shared code, and it's just an incredibly powerful platform. So I'd like to see it take off. So anyway, over the next few months I'll still be working at that and documenting stuff, and yeah, if you guys want to give it a shot, please do, and talk to me and we'll try and figure stuff out. Cool. Any questions? Yes?
How did you build your client view for your website?
My client view? I've got a library called Detox which does DOM and XML stuff. So I used that, and it's got a whole way of developing widgets and everything, and anyway, that's probably for another talk. But I used that. Are you talking about the actual view or the controllers and routing on the client side as well?
The actual view.
The actual view.
Is it HTML?
It's all HTML, and it's using Bootstrap, and yeah, just using basic DOM events, basically. So, any other questions? Yes?
When you use the many-to-many relation,
yeah.
When you use the many-to-many relation, how do you add an object into the collection? You can push to it directly, or
yes.
You have to?
I didn't show that there, but the many-to-many is actually an object which has a very similar API to list. So it's got an iterator, it's got add, it's got remove. I think it's got push as well, but that's just an alias. So it's very similar to list, and if you add something, it creates the join as you add it. So it doesn't wait for you to hit save before it does the database insert. So that might not be optimal, but that's what it does at the moment. So, yep. Any other questions?
You have like a GitHub account or something?
Do I? Yes. The question is, do I have a GitHub account? My GitHub account is Jason O'Neill, JASONONEIL. That's there. I have created a UFront organization which Franco and me are on, and maybe other people if they want to get involved. So I'm going to be pushing all the repositories to that. So that one is github.com/UFront. At the moment, it's just got empty repositories sitting there. But that's where all this will get pushed. So, yep. That all?
Any question?
Cool.
Okay. That was very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.